4 years after my death, my grandmother discovered my old phone and decided to call Harry. "Harry, Helen, it's been 4 years. Now you choose to reach out to me? What's wrong? Did the sugar daddy run out of cash? If you're struggling, sell yourself. Stop acting so pathetic around me. Honestly, I don't want to see you, not even in death." On the other side, my grandmother was taken aback. Her hunched posture made her seem especially lonely. She carefully held the phone and asked, "Harry, did you and Helen argue? I can't find Helen?" After she spoke, her cloudy eyes wandered around the empty room as she softly recalled, "Right, Helen is dead, gone. How could I forget again?" Perhaps unable to leave my grandmother alone, I stayed with her even after my death. Sadly, she developed Alzheimer's and often forgot that I had passed away. This time, she had another episode and wandered to the park, losing her way back home. The stubborn old woman sat on a bench, mumbling to herself, "It's okay if I can't find my way. Helen will realize I'm not home and come looking for me." My spirit stayed by her side, though she wasn't far from home. I couldn't guide her properly because she couldn't hear me. As the sun set, my anxiety as a spirit grew. An elderly woman nearing 80 wouldn't manage well if she spent the night alone in the park. Thankfully, it seemed my grandmother sensed this. She looked around the thinning crowd and finally stood up, approaching someone. She grabbed their arm and asked, "Have you seen my granddaughter Helen?" I knew that once she engaged someone, they would understand her predicament and likely take her to the police station, ensuring her safe return home. Unfortunately, she approached the wrong person. Harry. Harry looked at my grandmother with a hint of impatience. "Where did Helen go? Why are you here alone? It's so late, and she lets an old lady like you stay in the park by herself?" He didn't finish his sentence, perhaps out of some respect for her, but I understood his disdain. He likely wanted to imply that I was seeing someone else. Even after 4 years since my death, his contempt for me hadn't faded. My grandmother, however, didn't grasp his meaning and was genuinely happy to see Harry. "Harry, it's been ages since you last had a meal at my house. Aren't you the one who loves my dumplings the most? Your birthday is tomorrow. Come over for dumplings. Young people should treat each other well. Helen is so talented but tends to keep to herself. When she went out today, she even mentioned getting you a birthday present. She wants to surprise you tomorrow." It turned out my grandmother was stuck in that day. Back then we were deeply in love, much like any passionate couple, and his little mistress hadn't appeared yet. What a shame. Hearing this, Harry smirked mockingly. "Grandma, that's not funny. Helen and I have already broken up. You say she went out to buy me a gift, but I bet she bought something for another man." My grandmother was shocked. "You broke up? Helen never told me. Harry, don't be angry. When Helen comes back, I'll give her a good scolding." The sight of her getting upset was incredibly endearing. I wanted to embrace her and calm her down, but as a spirit, I passed right through her. 4 years on, I still wasn't used to being invisible. Harry laughed even harder, clearly not believing my grandmother. "I told you, we're done. If this is just something Helen made you say, I might forgive it this time. Just don't mention her name around me anymore." At that moment, 2 middle-aged women from the neighborhood approached and noticed my grandmother's confused expression. "Auntie, it's so late. Why aren't you home yet? Did you forget where you live again?" One of the women sighed and shook her head. "It's so sad, this old lady relying on her granddaughter. We didn't realize her granddaughter died 4 years ago, leaving her all alone." Yes, I had passed away 4 years prior. I remembered that birthday when I happily went out to buy Harry a gift, only to see him in a mall with another woman, acting affectionate. In a daze, I left and later received a private message from a stranger on a social media app. Opening it, I saw a selfie of a girl wearing a man's white shirt, lying on a messy white bedsheet in a hotel. Accompanying the photo was a message. "They say little mistresses can't compete with those sent from heaven. Do you think I, as a little mistress, can compete?" I recognized the white shirt. The top button was sewn on by me. I remembered it clearly because the little flower I had added was inspired by an online blogger. Harry didn't mind it and even wore it to important meetings, claiming it symbolized our love. But now, that symbol was on another woman. That's when I realized how cheap love could be. Hearing the women's remarks, Harry's expression hardened. Emotions flickered across his face before he asked incredulously, "What are you saying? Helen is dead?" "You're lying to me, right? Helen must have told you to say that. This woman is so good at sweet talking." The two women were shocked, murmuring while supporting my grandmother. "Who is she? Is she crazy? Who dares to talk about someone's death like that? It's like cursing them." At that moment, my grandmother seemed to remember something. She opened her mouth, her lips trembling, and finally said, "Yes, Helen. Helen is no longer here." Harry stood there, dumbfounded and looking somewhat foolish. Meanwhile, my wandering spirit drifted back home with the two women assisting my grandmother. I felt a sense of relief as my grandmother entered the house, grateful that Harry didn't follow. Perhaps remembering my death made her feel deeply sad. The lonely old lady sat on the sofa, her thin hands gently holding my photo as tears silently streamed down her face. "You were so young. How could you leave before your grandmother?" she whispered. I floated over, wanting to wipe her tears, but I passed right through her. All I could do was weep and comfort her, saying, "Grandma, Helen hasn't left. Helen is right here." Sadly, she couldn't hear me. Just then, the doorbell rang, followed by Harry's voice. "Grandma, open the door. It's me, Harry." I was startled. No, I couldn't let him in. If he came inside and started going through my things, I couldn't bear to think of the consequences. My grandmother was a bit slow, turning her head slowly upon hearing the doorbell and the call. She seemed to hesitate. Harry's voice came again from outside. "Grandma, just let me in. Helen, I thought about it calmly. How could you possibly be dead? It's just a trick to deceive me? I'm here now. What are you pretending for? Open the door!" he shouted angrily, followed by forceful doorbell ringing. I was furious. His loud yelling would scare my grandmother. He used to be different, always speaking softly, afraid to sound harsh towards me or her. But now, besides ringing the doorbell, he was also banging on the door. I felt a surge of resentment and rushed to the door, wanting to confront him. As a spirit, I passed right through the door. Even though I swung my fist in anger, it simply went through. Unable to teach Harry a lesson, I became frustrated, and tears of anger welled up. But as a spirit, I couldn't cry as intensely as before. I yelled back, "Yes, I lied to you. Leave. Just go away and never come back." As I was venting my anger, I heard something fall inside the house. Worried something had happened to my grandmother, I quickly returned. Fortunately, she was safely seated on a chair, but the photo frame in her hand had fallen to the ground. She seemed to have just woken up, staring at the fallen frame and bending down to pick it up. Then she held it, repeatedly wiping my photo with it. "It's dirty. Helen loved this photo the most. Thank goodness it didn't break." Yes, this was once my favorite photo because Harry had taken it for me. In reality, I wanted to tell my grandmother that this photo was no longer my favorite. My favorite was the one in her hands, the photo of you and me together. After my grandmother finished speaking, she trembled as she stood up and placed the frame back. She stood quietly, a smile returning to her face. I sniffled, unsure whether her illness was a blessing or a curse. Her condition had worsened recently, and she had forgotten that Helen had passed away. At that inconvenient moment, the front door was knocked again. My grandmother responded, "Coming, coming." She slowly walked to the door. As it opened, Harry's angry face was clearly visible. "Where's Helen?" he demanded. His eyes scanned the area. I knew he was searching for me. My grandmother was very tidy and often cleaned the house. Since her Alzheimer's worsened, sometimes when I crouched nearby, I'd see her cleaning twice. The only difference was that 4 years had passed and the house remained exactly the same. "Oh, it's Harry, isn't it?" After losing her memory, my grandmother became even more endearing. She warmly invited Harry, "Come in and have a seat. Helen went out." "Yes, she went out, but where did she go?" she replied, turning to look out the window and murmuring, "It's already dark outside. Helen will surely come back soon. She never spends the night out. She said she can only rest easy if she stays with me at night." Harry didn't seem interested in listening to her words, especially after hearing that I had gone out. His eyes were filled with mockery, subtly ridiculing me. Fortunately, he still had some decency and didn't say anything too harsh. Instead, he walked towards my room. I couldn't stop him from entering, so I floated beside him, watching his every move. As soon as he turned the doorknob, a pink-themed room appeared. My grandmother had carefully prepared it for me, skillfully sewing pink curtains inside. I really liked it here. Even after death, I would float around and rest on this bed. Unfortunately, spirits don't need sleep or feel tired. After opening the door, Harry continued walking in, his gaze landing on the table with our photo together. A hint of surprise crossed his face, but was quickly replaced by mockery. "Aren't you already with someone else? Why keep this photo to reminisce about how you deceived me so badly in the past?" "Helen, the biggest regret of my life is loving you," he declared. Then he violently opened the photo album, tore the pictures to pieces, and angrily threw them back on the table. I felt hurt, thinking clearly you were the one who betrayed me first. Why are you so upset and angry now? My grandmother stood at the door, holding a glass of juice, and asked dazedly, "Harry, what are you doing?" Her anger made her steps swift as she placed the juice on the counter. Seeing Harry tear apart the photo of him and me, she immediately confronted him. "Harry, you're her boyfriend. How could you do this?" Grandmother knew Harry wouldn't act this way before. He used to be very gentle. His acquaintance with me was purely accidental. He was the heir to the Smith Group, while I was just a newcomer to the workforce. The Smith Company was the aspiration of nearly every recent graduate in City A, offering competitive salaries, excellent benefits, and a prestigious workplace to proudly mention at reunions. I was fortunate enough to secure an internship through campus recruitment. However, the reality of the work environment proved to be far more intricate than I had anticipated. During my initial month, the company hosted a departmental social event. Charlie, the department head, was an alumnus from my high school, and our paths had intersected a few times previously. At the event, he was insistent on having a drink with me and another new female colleague, claiming the gathering was specially organized for the two of us. He even gave my shoulder a pat and leaned in, saying, "Helen?" I couldn't decline, so I had to down 2 drinks. Meanwhile, the young woman beside me had already gone pale, clutching her glass of water and appearing unsettled. Noticing her discomfort, I whispered to her, and she quietly confided that she was allergic to alcohol. Charlie, proudly holding his glass, remarked, "I'm allergic too, but it's fine to have a little. People entering the workforce need to learn to handle their drinks, you know?" His comment sparked a ruckus among the others, creating a chaotic atmosphere. Summoning unexpected bravery, I stood up to protect her from the alcohol. "Charlie, she really can't drink. If necessary, I can take this glass for her. What does everyone think?" Amidst the ensuing confusion, I ended up consuming 6 consecutive glasses. Eventually, feeling dizzy, I leaned back on a couch to rest and noticed Harry sitting beside me. He sat silently, his striking looks and stern demeanor captivating me. Perhaps the alcohol gave me the courage to maintain eye contact as he held his glass, seemingly equally intrigued by me. Our gazes locked and I felt an unmistakable attraction. Even as my consciousness wavered, I couldn't help but marvel at his handsome appearance. Suddenly, I found myself pressed against a restroom wall, drunk. My body felt light and unsteady. In a daze, I saw Charlie pressing against me, reaching for my pants. Fear jolted me into action, and I began to resist. "Senior, what are you doing?" Charlie's demeanor had shifted from friendly to lecherous. "What am I doing? I want to be close to you. Helen, I like you. You're so beautiful. How could I not be attracted to you? If you go along with me, I'll assign you to the next project and promote you directly to team leader." As Charlie spoke, he leaned in closer. Feeling powerless, I fought back with all my might, refusing to let my life be ruined by his actions. "Let go of me, Charlie. What you're doing is illegal. Help! Someone help!" My voice was barely audible over the surrounding noise. Just as I was about to take desperate action, the commotion outside ceased abruptly. The restroom door was kicked open, and a tall, imposing figure appeared, delivering a powerful punch to Charlie's face. The man then embraced me, and we fled the distressing scene together. Harry, of all people, he was undeniably charming. At that moment, Harry had a serious expression as he watched Grandma nervously tidy up the remaining photos on the table. "Grandma, I'm not her boyfriend anymore. We broke up a while ago. She betrayed me." Grandma paused before responding. "Helen wouldn't betray you. Out of everything she does, most of it is about you. She remembers your favorite foods, and even though she can't cook well, she insists on making something for you." Her voice was cut off by Harry's phone vibrating. I glanced at it and saw the name Maggie on the screen. His brows knitted slightly, and despite the repeated vibrations, he didn't answer immediately. It was somewhat amusing. Men do tend to lose interest quickly once they've had something for a while. Weren't you deeply in love with your mistress before? Now, in this state, who are you trying to impress? After the phone stopped vibrating, Harry seemed about to speak, but instead clenched his phone and left. Curious about whether they had married or what they were discussing, I followed Harry as he left the room and headed towards the door. "Hey." His voice was as pleasant as ever. In the past, I often closed my eyes and rested against his chest, enjoying the sound of his magnetic voice. It turns out he could be gentle with someone else too. A voice called from the other end of the phone, "Harry, why aren't you here yet?" Without hesitation, Harry replied softly, "I'm on my way." Clearly, he still loved her. Whenever Maggie called, he would rush over. After ending the call, I saw Harry hesitate at the door. Grandma sat in a chair, struggling to understand why Harry, whom I admired so much, had broken up with me. She looked somewhat sorrowful. Harry glanced briefly before shutting the door and walked toward the elevator. As he reached it, I wanted to go back and comfort Grandma. But then I noticed him pulling something from his pocket. Wasn't that my phone, held in his hand? That deceitful thief! When had he stolen my phone? Furious, I lunged towards him, passing through his body. The elevator doors opened and he stepped inside. I angrily perched on his shoulder, shouting loudly, "Harry, I can't believe you have such a habit. This is theft. Don't you realize you should go to the police? I demand you return my phone now or I'll curse you to death. Do you understand that you're a thief?" Despite my yelling, he didn't hear me. Instead, he placed the phone back in his pocket and casually left the building, getting into a Maybach parked at the entrance. I was most concerned about the phone's contents. Even though I didn't want to see any affectionate messages, I had to follow him and get into the car. The destination wasn't his home. It was a hotel. Seeing the familiar location triggered a sharp pain in my body. Why here? Why did they choose the hotel where we used to stay as their meeting spot? It was also the same place where he was supposed to propose to me. Watching him exit the car, I loudly questioned, "Harry, aren't you ashamed? Can't you pick another place?" Only when I floated inside did I realize they weren't on a date but an engagement. Maggie was dressed in a light blue fishtail gown resembling a fairy tale princess. It seemed fairy tales were all lies. The princess and prince were the perfect match. Maggie greeted him cheerfully. "Harry, where have you been? I couldn't find you anywhere." The Maggie before me beamed brightly, her voice gentle and soft, unlike how she used to speak to me. As she reached out to hold Harry's arm, I thought that after all these years and now being no longer human, I should be more understanding. However, seeing Maggie's affectionate gesture made me feel disgusted. I wasn't sure if Harry did it on purpose, but when Maggie extended her hand, he took a step back, avoiding her touch, and instead moved toward his parents. "Dad, Mom!" Maggie's hand missed its mark, and a flash of anger crossed her eyes before she quickly withdrew her hand, looking embarrassed. Suddenly, she glanced in my direction and muttered through gritted teeth, "Helen, it's all your fault, you damn woman. Are you still sticking around after all these years?" I was stunned. Could Maggie see me? I waved my hand in front of her eyes, but fortunately, she couldn't see me. Maggie took a deep breath to compose herself, then smiled again and turned to walk towards Harry's parents. Harry, however, turned around and softly said, "Not all the guests have arrived yet. I'll be in the restroom for a moment. You stay here and keep my parents company." Just by mentioning his parents, Maggie's eyes softened with a smile. She gently replied, "Okay." I didn't have time to focus on their small talk because I saw Harry gripping his phone and heading swiftly toward the restroom. He wasn't heading to the restroom, he had other plans. Sure enough, Harry reached the hallway corner, took out my phone, and tried to turn it on. My heart raced, knowing I couldn't take the phone back. I clenched my fists and watched his actions intently. The phone screen lit up, but just as I was tense, it flickered and went dark again. He attempted to turn it on once more, but the screen remained blank. It had been over a year since Grandma last charged it, and the recent flicker suggested it might be broken. Nevertheless, Harry took out his own phone and dialed a number. "Lee, come out here for a moment." Lee was his assistant, and he quickly appeared after the call. Harry handed him my phone. "Ensure it's repaired immediately. Additionally, search for any updates on Helen." Lee answered the call, a trace of bewilderment in his expression, yet he consented. For 4 long years, finally, he decided to seek out information about me. Sadly, I'm no longer alive. I even began to think that discovering my demise might bring him some relief. Right? After all, the woman he hated and never wanted to encounter had finally left this life. Soon after, Harry was summoned back by his mother. The hotel was teeming with guests, all witnessing their joyous moment. I had envisioned this scene in my dreams, but sadly, I never got to experience it firsthand. The host invited Harry onto the stage to deliver a speech, and I hovered nearby, drifting around him. His face stayed stern, which I couldn't accept. I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Harry, you unfaithful man, now that you've achieved your desires, what more could you possibly crave?" Harry couldn't hear me, but his eyes stayed fixed on the doorway. I followed his sight, puzzled by what he was anticipating. Was he waiting for Lee to return and inform him of my death? Even if he discovered it, what difference would it make? Out of nowhere, the MC handed the microphone to Harry and grinned, asking, "Harry, is today the day you marry Maggie?" A hush fell over the room, all eyes on Harry, and I directed my attention to him as well. His lips began to move, glancing at Maggie beside him, just as the phone buzzed again. "Apologies. I need to take this." The call connected, and I drifted closer, hearing Lee's voice through the speaker. "Harry, Helen may have passed away 4 years ago. There was a drowning incident back then, and evidence points to Helen likely being the driver. However, the police found nothing after a 2-week search, and since Helen's only relative was her elderly grandmother, they gave up." Lee spoke softly, audible only to Harry and me. I saw Harry's complexion turn ashen, and his hand shook as he ended the call, opening Lee's message. It revealed the news of my drowning 4 years prior. Although the report didn't specify who drowned, anyone paying attention to the date of my disappearance could deduce it was me. I moved closer, attempting to tousle his hair playfully, and teased, "See, they say I'm dead, and you still don't believe it. Oh, Harry, why are you unchanged? No matter what I say, you never trust me." The moment the words left my mouth, Harry coughed up blood. Bright red blood splattered the red carpet, vanishing instantly. Panic erupted among the guests, and even Maggie was taken aback. Harry, having just expelled blood, collapsed to the floor. "Harry!" I yelled, rushing to support him, but my body passed right through his as he fell lifelessly. Chaos ensued. Harry's parents were equally shocked, and a few quick-thinking individuals lifted him into a car and sped him to the hospital. Unsure of what to do next, I floated into the vehicle and settled on Harry's chest, watching him closely. "Harry, didn't you say that even if I died, you wouldn't overlook me?" When Harry regained consciousness, I was drifting around the room. The VIP ward differed from a standard one. It was spacious enough for me to perform somersaults effortlessly. Seeing Harry awake, his parents hurried in, followed by Maggie. His mother asked with worry, "Harry, what happened? Have you been overworking yourself?" Harry smiled and replied, "Mom, I'm okay. You all can go now. I need some quiet time." Maggie began to speak but ended up leaving with Harry's parents. The room fell silent once more. Suddenly, Harry pulled back the covers and struggled to make his way to the bathroom. Initially, I wanted to follow, but decided it might be intrusive. However, strange noises emanated from the bathroom, piquing my curiosity. Inside, I saw Harry weeping with reddened eyes. Though he tried to hold back his tears, they streamed uncontrollably. Eventually, he started dry heaving, a reaction I recognized from moments of intense sorrow. "Harry, did you know I died? Aren't you even a little relieved?" After vomiting, Harry refreshed himself and dragged his exhausted body back to the bed. For some reason, he fell asleep, and I, lying beside him, also drifted into slumber. Maggie's voice awakened me. She continued to speak softly, showing concern. Harry responded briefly, and soon Lee entered the room. Upon seeing Lee, Harry requested, "Take me to where the accident happened. Arrange everything. I need to uncover the truth about that car crash." Maggie's eyes flashed with a hint of fear upon hearing his request, though only fleetingly. I noticed it. Regarding my drowning, my memories are hazy, perhaps because I'm now a spirit. I've only recently begun recalling fragments of my time with Harry. Harry and Lee departed, and I saw Maggie quickly make a phone call, looking rather odd. So, I followed as I floated out. "Did you handle it as I instructed? It's been 4 years. But you know, once Harry starts investigating, the truth can't be concealed. Are you certain you didn't slip up?" "But what's happening now? All these years, I've tried my best to stop him from discovering that the damn woman is dead, yet he found out. I suddenly realized the damned woman Maggie referred to was me. Fury surged through me, ready to lash out. "You're the damn woman! Does this mean my death wasn't accidental but a deliberate plot by Maggie? How dare she commit murder?" I angrily surged toward Maggie repeatedly, but only passed through her. Exhausted from the futile attempts, I decided to follow Harry, eager to visit the place of my death. After all, my body was still missing. As I entered Harry's car, I saw Lee handing him the fixed phone. Perfect timing. Today, I experienced it firsthand with a heart as cold as ashes. I watched Harry unlock my phone by entering the password correctly. His birthday. If only I hadn't died so abruptly and had the chance to change it, I might have prevented his success. Soon he stumbled upon my private messages on social media, discovering Maggie's taunts and the photos she sent me. I floated directly in front of him and berated, "You despicable man! Do you see now? You betrayed me, not the other way around. You were unfaithful. Ugh, how disgusting." After reading the messages, Harry's hands shook uncontrollably. Finally, he closed his eyes in torment and cried, "Helen, why didn't you tell me earlier? It's all my fault. It's all my fault." Yes, it was entirely his fault. In reality, I confronted him earlier. The day after Maggie sent me the photos, I went to his office and demanded, "Harry, did you sleep with Maggie?" But Harry abruptly changed his demeanor, sneering at me. "So what if I did, Helen? Who do you think you are? Why should I inform you? Don't think I'm unaware of your actions behind my back. Listen carefully, Helen. I, Harry, never loved you." He had declared his love for me just the day before, and now he was denying everything while embracing another woman. I watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. Later, Maggie looked down at me with a mocking smile and said, "Helen, let me reveal the truth. You were merely a placeholder for Harry's emotions. Now that his real girlfriend is back, you, the substitute, better disappear as far as you can." I distinctly recall a few days ago when he held me tightly and proudly declared, "Helen, you weren't honest. Last night, I became yours. You must take responsibility." Reflecting on it, we did share many sweet moments. The car swiftly reached our destination. After exiting, Harry went straight to the trunk, retrieved a diving suit, and donned it. Lee was taken aback by his actions and didn't have time to react before Harry found his spot and plunged into the sea. I followed and jumped into the water with him. The depths were immense, and the darkness grew as we descended. Even as a spirit, I felt a twinge of fear. This time, he stayed submerged for an extended period, and even as his oxygen nearly depleted, he hesitated to surface. Lee urged him, "Harry, your oxygen is running out. You need to come up. If you keep this up, you'll die." He remained silent, diving deeper into the ocean. My patience was wearing thin. The water was so deep and frigid, even experts couldn't retrieve me, let alone him. Just as I was about to rise to the surface, I heard Harry's shaky voice say, "I found it." Following his flashlight's beam, I saw an abandoned, sunken vehicle at the ocean floor. The car was tangled in seaweed, and the intense pressure had shattered the windows, turning the interior into a playground for fish. At that moment, I saw only my bare bones. Harry swam swiftly towards me, standing there as if he couldn't fathom what he was seeing. He hastily unbuckled the seatbelt attached to the skull and meticulously cleared away the tangled seaweed. When he noticed the diamond ring on the skeleton's finger, Harry gasped out, "Helen!" It was so ironic. The same ring he had used to propose to me, the one he had given me, was now adorning a skeleton. At that instant, the alarm indicating that oxygen levels were dangerously low began to sound. Panic set in for me as I desperately urged him to leave, but it was clear Harry couldn't escape due to his insufficient oxygen supply. He gently cradled the skeleton in his arms, softly saying, "Helen, I'm sorry for making you wait." Lee rescued Harry and brought him ashore. Although he was unconscious, Harry held my skeletal remains tightly. He remained out of consciousness for 2 days and 2 nights. Upon waking, his first instinct was to look for my skull, but fortunately Lee had informed him in time. "Harry, I've properly handled Helen's remains. Don't worry, without your instructions, no one else can manage them," Lee assured him. Harry nodded, his face pale and drawn. "Continue doing what I asked." Lee departed, and I floated before Harry, unable to stop myself from blurting out, "Oh, Harry, Maggie is the murderer. How could you not suspect her?" Harry, who was lying down, seemed to remember something and slowly rose from the bed, walking step by step towards the ward. The VIP ward was nearly empty, and as soon as he exited, he overheard Maggie speaking on the phone. If he discovers the truth, neither of us will make it. Everyone connected to that woman has been dealt with. I realized Maggie's time was running out. Sure enough, Harry's eyes turned bloodshot, and he moved toward Maggie with a menacing intent. Why did you hurt Helen? Why did you betray both me and her? Clearly, I meant nothing to you. Maggie, I trusted you so much. I'm gonna kill you. His grip tightened, and Maggie's complexion paled as she struggled to breathe. I was taken aback. What had Harry just declared? He said they didn't mean anything to each other. I couldn't believe it. If they truly didn't matter, why hadn't he explained it when I confronted him? Why maintain a connection with Maggie while being with me? I watched the scene coldly, wishing Harry would end Maggie's life. Lee hurried over, pulling Harry's hand away as Maggie gasped for air. Harry, you can't do this. Helen died so tragically. If you directly attack the real culprit, aren't you letting her off too easily? Harry's body suddenly tensed. Maggie managed to breathe again, collapsing to the ground and coughing violently. Once she finished, tears streamed down her face as she begged, Harry, I'm sorry, please forgive me. It was a moment of madness. It's all because I loved you too much. I didn't want anyone to take you away from me. Harry clenched his teeth, forcing out, get lost. I never want to see your disgusting face again. Maggie stood frozen, staring blankly at the man she had loved for over a decade. I'll have Lee gather all the evidence to charge you with Helen's murder. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Get out! Maggie was startled and stumbled away. I expected to feel anger, but as I looked at Harry with his bloodshot eyes, a sense of relief washed over me. I sat beside him, talking incessantly. All right, big guy, why are you crying again? Look, I haven't shed a tear. It's a shame I died so young, you know? There were so many places I wanted to visit. Just then, Harry spoke up. You should leave too. Take care of the things I entrusted to you. Make sure they're handled properly. No matter the cost, I want you to hire the best lawyer and ensure Maggie rots in jail. Lee acknowledged this and left. Harry let out a bitter laugh, his eyes still red. He muttered, Helen, I'm sorry. It was all my misunderstanding. You said Maggie wasn't trustworthy. I should have believed you. In reality, during the 2 days Harry was in the hospital, I had visited my grandmother. She seemed to be doing well. Several elderly women from the community came by, all of them toothless, sitting in the house, chatting happily. However, they would suddenly go silent if they accidentally mentioned their granddaughters. My grandmother didn't remember anything. She spoke freely, praising how wonderful and handsome her granddaughter and grandson-in-law were. I thought it was actually a good thing that my grandmother didn't remember those things. When I returned to the hospital, Harry was packing his belongings. He placed his phone on the bedside table, removed his valuables, and then took my phone and a letter from an unknown place. He avoided the hospital's surveillance and headed to the basement garage. I didn't know what he was planning, but I had a bad feeling about it. Seeing him sit expressionlessly in the driver's seat, I immediately followed and sat inside. I shouted, Harry, where are you going? Why didn't you bring your phone or valuables? He didn't hear me and simply pressed the gas pedal, driving away. I felt anxious watching him accelerate recklessly toward the coastal highway. Even though the car played my favorite song, it couldn't calm my nerves. Was this foolish man planning to sacrifice himself for love? Just as I feared Harry would drive the car into the sea, he stopped. I touched my chest, which no longer beat, and sighed deeply. You idiot! You scared me! I thought you were going to jump into the ocean! Harry closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then lit a lighter, igniting the envelope on the passenger seat. Helen, I'm sorry. Helen, are you beside me? If souls really exist, please accept my letter. Flames began to rise, and a letter appeared in my hand with "To Helen" written on it. Helen, I'm sorry for addressing you this way, but I truly don't know what else to do. I was so foolish. You've been gone for 4 years, yet I still believed you were alive. It was my stupidity. Only now do I realize Maggie deceived me with just a few photos. I had no idea she would send you such photos and messages behind the scenes. Helen, I swear I never touched her. It was always you from the start, and you were never a substitute for anyone, especially not her. You are simply you. Remember when you asked why I chose you and when I began to develop feelings for you? I'll tell you now. It was because you risked your own safety to protect others. It was both foolish and adorable. And that's when my heart began to flutter. Do you know, Helen, I found your secret diary on your phone. It contained every little detail about us. Our first date, our first kiss, and even our first... Helen, Grandma was right. You are a kind-hearted and thoughtful girl, and I have let you down. I saw your last message on social media. Harry, if I really die, what about you? Will you die with me? Now I can tell you I will, Helen. Please wait for me. The secret diary was indeed where I kept my journal. Everything inside visible only to me. In just a few hundred words, I spent a long time reading. When I finally came back to reality, I heard the sound of Harry pressing the gas pedal. The front of the Maybach faced the sea, and I knew exactly what he intended to do. Harry, are you insane? I don't want you to die for love. Promise me you'll live. Can you hear me? But he couldn't hear my cries. At that moment, the car sped toward the sea. Memories flooded back as if I were reliving the day we plunged into the ocean. Countless waves engulfed me, burning my nose, throat, and lungs with pain. Death wasn't frightening. The process of dying was terrifying. I watched as the seawater gradually submerged the Maybach and jumped into the sea without hesitation. Even though I knew jumping wouldn't change anything, I still plunged in, watching Harry close his eyes as water surrounded him. I climbed into the car and looked at him with closed eyes. Wasn't this the sharp and handsome man I once loved deeply? But now he was about to die too. The sea was incredibly deep, and I sank deeper with Harry. Just as I felt utterly desolate, a voice came from behind me. Helen, is that really you? I turned around and saw Harry floating outside the car window. Looking back at the other Harry still inside, I realized the one outside was his spirit. It's me, Harry. He looked at me, his face filled with joy. Helen, can you take me away? Take him away? Of course I can't. I shook my head. No, you can't die, Harry. You have to hold on. They will come to rescue you soon. Harry, I'm gone. I can't look after Grandma anymore. If you survive, please take care of her for me, all right? She's the only person I truly care about in this world. I spoke these words and then hesitated. It felt like I had neglected someone else important. Besides Grandma, someone very dear to me. But who could she be? My memory fails me completely. Harry gave a sorrowful smile and responded, What about me? You, Harry, still have people who love you and whom you love. Begin your life anew. I thought I heard a voice, and then the Maybach was lifted by an unseen force. Someone found Harry, who had plunged into the sea. I realized he was returning. Harry was rescued. Shortly after, he and the car were pulled out. An invisible force drew him back. I smiled and waved at him. Please, take care of Grandma. Absolutely. I tried to leave him with the most beautiful memory of me. When Harry regained consciousness, I was still beside him. As soon as his eyes opened, they welled up with tears. Unfortunately, with the oxygen tube still in place, he couldn't speak at that moment. He could only move his eyes to look at Lee. Lee understood his silent plea and leaned closer, took out his phone, and held it up. Harry typed 2 words. Grandma. He remembered his promise to help care for my grandma. Lee saw the message and immediately understood. Then she closed her eyes, tears of regret streaming down her face. What good is regret when I'm already gone? I huddled over his chest, watching his anguished yet absurd expression. In truth, I should be laughing at his choice of partner, at his suffering, at how he deserves to feel this misery. But instead, I couldn't stop sniffing, overwhelmed by sadness. I returned to staying by Grandma's side. Harry kept his promise. He found the best caregiver for Grandma, and even Lee would keep her company and converse with her. Grandma enjoyed a happy life every day, and I floated around in the air, filled with joy. One day, while Lee was sharing a story with Grandma, Harry arrived. Seeing Harry, Grandma suddenly asked, "Young man, are you a friend of Helen's? You're quite handsome, a perfect match for my Helen." Harry smiled and his eyes reddened again. He embraced Grandma and whispered softly, "Yes, Grandma. Helen went on a business trip to a distant place. She asked me to keep you company during this time." It turned out Grandma's condition had deteriorated. While Lee stayed with her, Harry entered my room once more and saw the photo he had previously torn apart. His body began to shake uncontrollably. Fortunately, Lee noticed in time and supported him. Harry waved his hand and said, "I'm okay." Then he pushed Lee's hand away and took small steps into my room, desperately trying to reassemble the photo he had destroyed before. Later, he discovered my diary in a drawer. When he opened it, he saw his name written on every page. Harry broke down again because in the diary, I had written things like, "Harry, we're meant to be together forever. Harry, you promised to love me for a lifetime. Harry, how could you be with someone else while being with me? Harry, will you only be happy when I'm gone?" These were the questions that once troubled me, but now I understand the answers. Thanks to Harry's unwavering care, Grandma lived a joyful life. I continued to stay by her side, watching over her lovingly. One day, unexpectedly, Grandma grabbed Harry's hand and looked at him, saying, "Helen gave birth to a daughter for you." She even pulled out an ultrasound report that had been buried in a box and handed it to him. Harry froze, trembling, and asked in a shaky voice, "We have a daughter? Grandma, where is she now?" But no matter how he inquired, Grandma had no information. At that moment, a buzzing filled my mind. I recalled the most important person I had forgotten. Besides Grandma, it was our daughter. It was his birthday that day. And besides giving him a gift, I had planned to tell him about my pregnancy. But the next day, we broke up. The child I hadn't intended to keep, but thinking of it as a little life, I reluctantly gave birth to her. I didn't realize she was only a few months old when this happened. After my death, Grandma became seriously ill, and the elderly woman burdened with a baby couldn't care for her properly. In the end, the community decided to place the child in an orphanage. I lost those memories and have no idea which orphanage the child was sent to. I saw Maggie being imprisoned, sentenced to life without parole. I know this happened because of Harry's relentless efforts. Maggie can't die, and she can't be released. I also saw Harry keeping my body near a tombstone engraved with "Beloved wife Helen." After 3 years in prison, Maggie suddenly requested to see Harry, claiming she had information he needed. Although Harry didn't want to see her, he feared missing any news about our daughter, so he agreed to meet. Maggie looked at him through the glass with a strange smile and said, "Harry, I thought I'd never see you again. I still don't understand what she had that I didn't." Harry's patience had worn thin, and he replied coldly, "What about the news you mentioned? If it's just empty talk, there's no need to say anything." Perhaps fearing that Harry might actually leave, Maggie suddenly said, "I know you still have a child." Harry clenched his fist tightly. "Tell me where the child is. What have you done to our child?" Maggie laughed as if she had lost her mind, muttering to herself, "I had everything. I just wanted a man. Why did she have to interfere? Why did she have to get pregnant with your child? I could have spared her, but she had to bury your child, so she deserved to die. I really shouldn't have shown mercy back then, spared that old lady and the child." I knew Maggie had completely lost her sanity, becoming obsessed with Harry. While Harry wanted to continue questioning her, Maggie suddenly coughed up blood. Seeing her condition, Harry frowned and asked, "Maggie, what did you swallow?" Despite the pain, Maggie still smiled and said, "Poison. I can't be released in this life, but getting them to give me a little poison? How could that be impossible? Harry, I want you to live with regret and loneliness until you die." Maggie died, and the trail to our daughter was lost once more. In the days that followed, Harry continued searching for our daughter, but it seemed like fate was mocking him. Even until Grandma peacefully passed away at 80, he still couldn't find her. The only information he received was that our daughter had been adopted by a wealthy family. Fortunately, Grandma enjoyed a happy life in her final 20 years, and until her last moments, her face was always smiling. The day Harry left was 2 years after Grandma's passing. The middle-aged man, not even 50 yet, had a head full of silver hair. As his life neared its end, he gazed into the distance, filled with anticipation, whispering words no one could understand. "Helen, will you come to take me? Helen, why haven't you appeared in my dreams for the past 20 years? He reached out, grasping at the empty space before him, but at that moment he saw a girl who looked almost identical to Helen. Harry smiled. "Helen, is that you? I knew it. You've come to take me away." However, the girl approached him, gently shaking him with concern etched on her face. Grandpa, what happened to you? Hold on! I'll call an ambulance for you right now. In his final moments of consciousness, Harry couldn't tell if the person before him was truly Helen or their long-lost daughter. But one thing was certain, he had hurt her deeply, and it was unlikely she would ever come to see him again, not even in death.